thoughts and prayers. Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. First, I'd like to express my warmest wishes to Claire and her husband, Joseph. They're in our prayers, and we really are hoping for a swift and speedy recovery. I understand he's on the mend. We're getting good reports, so I know Claire would be here if at all possible. Secretary Ross, Controller General Dodaro, thank you again for joining us. This needs to be the first, I think, in the series of hearings concerning the Census Bureau and its plans for the 2020 census. Simply put, the 2020 census is in trouble. Budget uncertainty, canceled tests, increasing cost projections, and no Senate-confirmed director are all signs of an operation that is teetering. We can still get it back on track, but we're running out of time. The lack of even a nominee for the census director position is very troubling, and I hope this lack doesn't indicate the priority that the administration places on the constitutionally mandated census. A critical concern to me and to my constituents are the canceled tests in Indian country. Indian reservations provide unique challenges for the Census Bureau, such as historic distrust of the federal government, a lower likelihood of deliverable mail, and sparse population centers. As the 2020 effort begins to ramp up, the effort looked good. Coupled with the goal of tribal enrollment questions in 2020, the Census Bureau determined 2 tests were necessary to adequately prepare for potential roadblocks on the reservation and how we could have a more successful census effort on the reservation. However, both of those tests were canceled, and there are no plans, to which I am aware of, to replace them with any sort of tests related to the challenges the census will face in Indian country. I think this is a mistake and risks the success of the 2020 census in states, especially in western United States. For too long, we've given Indian country the leftovers. Members of these communities deserve to be counted where they reside, just like any other person. But because of the choices made in Washington, it would be much more difficult to make sure that that happens. These concerns just go beyond or go way beyond tribal issues. From what I have seen, I'm not sure the Census Bureau is generally prepared to do a very effective job in rural America nationwide. The planned tests focus more on urban and suburban regions. It is, of course, critical to get accurate counts there, but we have to make sure that the census is prepared to meet the needs of rural America. There are also questions regarding contracting decisions and information technology security as we move forward and enumerate these techniques and these challenges. The integration and modernization of the IT systems of the Bureau and the mobile device bid protests are issues of particular interest and importance to our ranking member, Senator Claire McCaskill, and I know she would talk about them if she were here today. With that, I look forward to hearing from the witnesses on how we're going to get this turned around and get the 2020 census back on track.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I continue to be concerned, Secretary Ross, about the lack of public trust in government. And I think that it has a dramatic effect on your ability to do the census. And breaches from the SEC or breaches from Equifax or security breaches play a huge and critical role, I think, in building public confidence. And I share Jean's concern about cybersecurity and about whether people feel their data is in fact secure. And so when you consider that in April of 2017, only 20% of the respondents in a Pew poll said that they trust the federal government all or most of the time. Considering the lack of public confidence, how can we convince anyone that they should turn information over to the Census Bureau? And what is the Census Bureau doing to overcome? You've identified a lot of tangible problems. Structural problems, personnel problems. Right. The intangible problem that I'm getting at is a lack of trust with the people that you're counting. And so how do we get over that intangible problem?
Well, those are very good questions, and those are frankly questions that relate very much to why the costs are so high. because the big cost is not the vast majority of the people, the easy to enumerate ones. Virtually all of the cost is dedicated toward the harder to enumerate people. Harder to enumerate either because they're Native Americans on reservations, harder to enumerate because of language issues, harder to enumerate for a variety of cultural reasons. So what are we doing about it? First of all, we have increased the communications budget to $500 million. That's way above the $350 million that was spent on it before. They have contracted with Young and Rubicam to be the overall general contractor for communications, and there are 20 different entities, some parts of Young and Rubicam, some outsiders, under that general rubric. And many of those are dedicated to very specific ethnic groups, very specific language groups, or very specific geographic groups. In addition, we're increasing quite a lot the money being expended on the partnerships with faith-based organizations and others in the various regions. We will have over 300,000 such community organizations that we're working with. Beyond that, we are experimenting with the idea of making better use of the U.S. postal system. The postal system historically has been the most reliable source of addresses and residences, but they have not historically used the postal system to actually do enumeration. Well, we're running a test in Providence, Rhode Island this spring, where one of the things we will be testing is working an arrangement with the postal system staff so that after hours they will work for us on our payroll and go door to door.
So you're talking, Secretary, about actually engaging with the mail carriers?
Absolutely.
That's because they know their route, they know the addresses, they're able to help you.
And often they know the people. But they also have a pretty good idea what's a vacant property and what's an occupied property. So that's one thing we're doing.
Yeah.
The other thing we're going to be experimenting with, again in Providence, is putting kiosks in the postal system offices around the country to make another easy place for people to fill out the questionnaires. And we hope that better use of the postal system may also help to address the trust issue that you were talking about, because nobody feels very threatened to have the mailman come to the door.
Yeah, and this is probably a personal experience that maybe wasn't shared with everyone. I was a long form recipient, filled out the long form, mailed it in the last time. Then I started getting calls from a census worker, and I was encouraged by a friend, said, you know, she needs to make a living, be nice, you can visit with her. And so I did, and at the point, she was asking me a lot of questions about how many devices I had in my house, cell phones, iPads, and I have a lot of that. She was pretty impressed. And about halfway through, I thought, what's that got to do with the census? And she said, well, we're gathering this additional statistical information for other vendors. And I'm like, yeah.
For other what?
For other contractors, people who had contract with Census to gather this information.
I don't believe that to
Well,
be the case.
it was a remarkable, yeah, I think that might have happened. It might have been a way to actually help pay for the census, I don't know. Yeah.
It might have been a survey that we did for another agency on a reimbursable basis. So we do.
Yeah, and that's my point, isn't it? My point is that under the guise of being a citizen, understanding a constitutional, citizenship responsibility to actually participate in the census, all of a sudden I'm the data point in something that doesn't have to do with counting. Right. And so these are the kinds of things. I raise this because it's the kind of thing that makes me go, what are you doing here? And it builds up a lack of confidence that the public would have with census workers. I mean, she was just doing her job. I'm not faulting her. But I was quite honestly struck, and I think it's critically important that you guys think about these add-ons or these extras that you're doing in terms of data collection, because it does negate the relationship that you have with the citizen. And so we've got lots of questions about how this goes, Secretary. We sit here willing to help and understand and appreciate, especially with special populations. And I know we'll probably get another round, so I want to ask some questions about special populations. But I want to applaud your answer in understanding that the bulk of people you're going to find pretty easily, and it is the marginalized population that we need to work very hard at getting to cooperate and counted. I think he wants to comment.
Two other things we're doing to try to build confidence. We will be trying to emphasize all the new things we're doing about cybersecurity. There are something like 39 upgrades of the cybersecurity from what had been done before, at least 24 of which are pretty strong improvements. And we've been working very actively with other parts of the federal government. And we hope to communicate that to the public, because people are very worried about personal security. It seems as though you cannot pick up a paper without somebody being hacked. So we recognize that's a very serious problem, and we're doing our best, A, to deal with it, and B, to publicize that we've dealt with it. The other thing, I don't think they've done enough publicizing the limitation on the use of the data, the Title 13 responsibilities. I think we're going to try to emphasize those quite a bit so that people know that it won't be used for law enforcement, it won't be used to deport them, it won't be used for anything. It will just be used for its proper purpose, which is enumeration.
Senator Langford.
Senator.
Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you. Just a couple points, Secretary Ross. You talked about kiosks in post offices. Frequently, the marginalized populations in our urban areas visit the library a lot. And working with libraries and communities can be very, very instrumental. They're trained to do outreach with a lot of populations. Have you guys developed any relationships with the public library system?
Yeah, quite a few of the libraries are part of the 250-odd thousand relationships that we have.
Yeah, I would just recommend that if you really want to look at a plus multiplier on marginalized and disenfranchised populations, homeless populations, chances are you're going to find a lot of those folks in the public library. It's where they have access to the internet. They wouldn't otherwise have it. And there's also folks there who, if we were able to do some collaboration and some cooperation in terms of money, you guys could be very helpful to the public library system as well. So I would just make that recommendation.
Yeah, we've been trying to do that.
Yeah, and I think you'll find them very willing. Frequently, the library staff spends a lot of time registering people to vote. It's where people go who feel like they don't know how to manipulate kind of government systems. Gene, you testified that your office responsibility for overseeing the technical integration contractor is severely understaffed, that the office is understaffed. I'm wondering what gets in the way of filling those critical positions, and I'm concerned about, number one, whether the federal hiring freeze delayed it unnecessarily, and do we need to take a look at hiring systems for the census? I think we're all in a period of low unemployment. We would argue we're at that spot. And in changes in the workforce, where you used to be able to hire temporary workers that would be older or seniors or women who worked outside the home, or the second wage earner, which would be much more part-time. We don't have that workforce anymore. So what do we need to do? And I guess this would be a question for both of you. What do we need to do in terms of recruiting workforce? One
of the things we changed in the budget was we raised the amount that we think we'll have to pay per hour.
And Mr. Secretary, right now, what is that amount per hour?
$17.50,
Yeah.
which I think for part-time work is a pretty good number, and it's certainly higher than what they were using.
And this is W-2 income, right? It's not
Yes,
1099
yes,
income?
Oh, sure. Census is not going to have people off the books.
Okay. Gene?
One thing I'd suggest that the department consider, as well as the Congress, Secretary Ross mentioned that we're using, off-duty postal service people.
Yeah.
And to see how that works. But one possibility, too, if that pans out, would be to hire retired postal service employees, because in using existing postal service employees, their salaries are 3 times the cost of a census worker. But Congress would have to give, or OPM could give, a waiver authority to the Secretary to waive the offset for the people's annuity. Right now, if you're a federal employee, you're receiving an annuity. If you take another job, you get your annuity offset. But if that's waived, then potentially
Incentive.
you could bring in retired postal employees at a lower rate. You could pay them the census rate to augment their income, and it wouldn't affect their annuities. So you'd get the biggest benefit with the least cost.
Yeah. I don't want to be the head of the Census Bureau, but I want to offer a couple suggestions. In addition to postal workers, you've got retired UPS or off-duty UPS, FedEx workers. Those folks know almost as much in North Dakota about who, especially in rural areas, where people live and because they deliver to all these places.
Right.
They could be a very helpful group as well, in addition to the Postal Service.
It could very well be. It's a little bit harder to find the retirees than it is to find the active employees, because a lot of them no longer stay in the area where they were delivering mail.
I would tell you that's probably not true in North Dakota,
No.
not
In
true in
any
rural
event,
areas.
Yeah,
I also think that making too many changes at one time can lead to a lot of confusion. If we can pull off the postal workers this time, I think that will be a very big achievement and something that one could build upon in the 2020 census.
Okay. I want to just ask one question for Secretary, or for Senator McCaskill, and it has to do with the Integrated Partnership and Communication Program. We were supposed to see the final plan, I think, by delivered in June. We don't have it yet. When can we expect that we'll receive that plan?
So, Senator, we released that last Friday at our quarterly program.
Well, I'm going to tell
review.
Claire, don't
And
give me a
and
question, there's
it's
already an
it's
answer.
And it's available online.
Okay, okay.
So, and
Thank-
could I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
When we were talking about the staff shortage for managing the TI contract. So in the additional request for $187 million in this fiscal year, that is one of the areas we're trying to address, is some of that money was earmarked for bolstering our program management office. And so that is something we're trying to address with this extra request. So this deep dive that we've done is, sort of expose these things, and that's
I
what we
could just
wanna-
tell you in North Dakota, you're going to have a heck of a time hiring census workers.
Yeah.
Even though the retirees don't flee south? Thanks, Senator Heitkamp.